Hello, friends, and welcome again to another session of Searching for Answers. We're deep into the Epistle to the Hebrews in the New Testament now, and really unpacking it rather slowly and carefully in some ways as we go, because it's such a rich text and has so much to offer. So grab your Bibles, get right into it, whatever Bible works for you, and if you have several translations or versions, all the better. On our discussion panel this evening, Dr. Bernard Taylor, Old Testament scholar who also knows the New Testament very, very well. Also, Dr. William Johnson, who is particularly close to this work, the Epistle to the Hebrews. Pastor Beverly Maravilla. Beverly is on the pastoral staff at La Sierra University Church in Area Family Ministries, and indeed is due for her ordination this coming weekend. A big salute, Beverly. We're happy for you.
Thank you.
Dr. Leo Ransolin, New Testament scholar on the Faculty of Religion here at Loma Linda University and the Associate Dean of the School of Religion. My name is John Jones, the HMS Richards Divinity School at La Sierra, and let's roll up our sleeves and get right into it. Chapter 8 we were looking at recently, last time as we were together, and it's a long, long quotation, the longest in the New Testament from the Old Testament. Dr. Johnson, help us pick up some pieces and threads from that now.
Okay, we've noticed as we've worked our way through Hebrews that a key word is better. And in chapter 7, we see Jesus as a better priest, a better high priest. In chapter 8, we see some new development. We find a better sanctuary, the true sanctuary, the heavenly. And we also read about a better covenant and better promises in chapter 8. And so over and over, we find this word better. The old is not bad. The new is simply better. Both come from God, but with the new, we have Jesus as high priest and sacrifice. And so chapter 8, this long quotation in particular, is setting us up for the discussion that will follow in chapters 9 and 10. From here on, it just keeps on going without any application break, right through 10:18. And it will elaborate the better sacrifice of Jesus, better than all the animal sacrifices. Because, as chapter 8 has already suggested at the end, I will remember their sins no more. Here's a sacrifice that truly takes care of the sin problem.
Yes. So, Leo, help us pick up the threads from that now.
If I could just, that is beautifully said about chapter 8. The other thing that is said in chapter 8:7 is, for if that first covenant had been faultless, chapter 8:7. And so there's this motif of something that's inadequate, that's imperfect, that has a fault in it. I mean, that's what this verse truly suggests about the old covenant, and hence the necessity of a new covenant. The old covenant had priests who offered sacrifices, the Aaronic, Levitical priests. And what this author is doing now in chapters 8, 9, and 10, again, drawing contrast between the Levitical priesthood and the Melchizedekian priesthood of Christ, the multiple animal sacrifices with the once and for all perfect, unrepeatable sacrifice of Christ. Again and again, he wants to draw contrast to highlight the superiority of the new covenant, of the high priest, of the once and for all offering. And the other thing that I would like to note is that he has said earlier that the priests on a regular basis offered sacrifices. Therefore, it was necessary for this priest as well to also have something to which to offer. And so he's about to begin to unpack what exactly that is that this high priest is going to offer.
Yes.
And the other thing, last thing I would say here at this moment is, again, back to the prologue, and Dr. Johnson alluded to this a long time ago, where you have this motif, when he had made purification for sins, right? that one little reference there is now going to be elaborated fully and richly in these chapters that we're about to examine.
Yeah, that is really the heart, isn't it? This purification. That's a unique word in Christian thought here, isn't it? So we'll invite you to take chapter 9 then. Get us down through the first 5 verses or so, whatever you
Okay, want me to read?
and that'll get us going.
Okay. Chapter 9, verse 1. Therefore, even the first covenant had regulations of worship and an earthly place of holiness, or here an earthly sanctuary. For the tent was prepared, the first one, in which were the lampstand and the table and the bread of the presence. This is the holy place. And behind the second curtain was the tent, which is called most holy place, that had a golden altar and the ark of the covenant, covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden urn or jar that had manna and the rod of Aaron which budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. And then he says, of these things we cannot now speak in detail.
Yes. Again, I think he's presupposing that this is an audience who knows something of Judaism,
Exactly.
something of the background, and so he's just kind of doing a quick inventory, isn't he? Bang, bang, bang. Okay, we know where we are. We've got ourselves located here. Holy place, most holy, holy of holies, and so forth. But then he wants to concentrate on that inner chamber, doesn't he? Behind that second curtain, that second veil, as he says. So this is a reaching back. It reaches back to the temple in Jerusalem. It reaches back behind that to a kind of an idealized moment, doesn't it, in the history of Israel? That great Exodus, which he has already been working with, already from the outset, with the promise of the fulfillment of the Sabbath meaning, the Sabbath rest. That is all kind of metaphorically building on the Exodus experience, isn't it? So he's still got that in mind, and so do his hearers. Now, what do we do with it? Anything in particular, Leo, you want to point out beyond the quick observation?
Well, 9, 1 through 10 is kind of a unit. He just basically gives a nice review, as you've nicely said, of the sanctuary, the holy place and most holy
First 5
place.
verses, he sets it forth, and then
And 6 through 10, he talks about the
begins to
regulations of the
unpack.
worship. And he kind of, this is kind of a review for his readers, and it seems to me they clearly have competencies with respect to what he's describing.
Yeah.
What I'm struck with, again, as I look at the Old Covenant, the Levitical priesthood, the sacrificial system, is 2 things that get highlighted. The holiness of God, his presence only in the most holy place, and the sinfulness of the people. And so what that, at least for me, highlights is the problem of sin, as you alluded to, John, needs to be dealt with. And also the issue of believers' access to the presence of God, given his holiness. That whole Old Covenant sacrificial system underscores those 2 points. And I think what it does, it prepares us for how this wonderful homily addresses those 2 dilemmas in powerful, beautiful ways.
Yeah.
We now have forgiveness of sins and, of course, access to the presence of God, as we're going to see.
John, 2 things.
Yes.
One, over the years, many teachers and preachers and many Adventists have taken delight in taking the Old Testament sanctuary piece by piece, the furniture, and then drawing spiritual.
Almost allegorizing.
They have, and it's been a lot of good stuff come out of that. It's interesting that he does not go down that road at all.
Right.
He says we're not interested to go into that. So as good as that has been, that's not where Hebrews go. Then the second thing I want to point out here is something that has puzzled me and puzzled a lot of others. As he talks about, the furniture of each compartment, the holy and then the most holy. When he comes to the most holy, holy of holies, in 4, in it stood the golden altar of incense. But that's not what you read in Exodus.
Right.
The golden altar is in the first apartment,
That's right.
not in the second.
It's in front of the veil, isn't
It's
it?
in front of the veil. He puts it on the other side of the veil. And I'd be interested to hear what other members of the panel may have an explanation for that. I've seen some attempted explanations, frankly. None of them I find persuasive. So I'll let the rest of you have a go at it.
Well, I can highlight what our commentary says, see if we find that satisfying, because I did take a look at it. And they said that perhaps what he had in mind is, as you say, the altar of incense was in the first apartment, but the incense flowed over into the second compartment. And so perhaps this author had a sense of the effect of the incense in the most holy place.
Is that satisfactory? It doesn't. It's not to me. Okay, maybe to others. Yeah.
Well, Beverly, did you want to jump in on that?
Well, I think I mean, I agree. I think it's really quite fascinating to see how we're going back and we're kind of creating this picture for all of us. I work with kids, so this is particularly helpful when you're trying to get kiddos to track their memory, is let's go back and let's map everything out. And yet, you're not going to go through all of the details, right? It made me think of, how interesting the time has changed, right? This is generations now of generations, and the story has been told so many times, right? It's not as if everybody had the manuscripts to look at and go, well, let me check out the Adventist commentary. What's the word and how is it written down? So it is helpful to think about how, stories came to be, how it is that we learned this information, and now all this time later, post, the scriptures in Leviticus, and we're at this time. So I'm not quite sure. I don't have an answer for you. But I did think, maybe this is why the covenant had to be renewed. They really messed it up. They couldn't get all of the furniture in the right place. It's time to start with a new picture because we've got it all mixed up. But yeah, quite interesting to take a look at that.
I find it quite extraordinary, really, in view of his knowledge of the Old Testament and the detail into which he goes. I have an explanation. It will probably shock you, so I won't give it to you. I'll tell you. Okay. I think, if you can bear it, I think it's a mistake. Simply a slip of the tongue,
Could that be it?
of the pen. But he says right away, I'm not interested in going into the detail. He says that. Okay. That doesn't concern me. Now, is it possible that the Bible could have mistakes? Yes, sure. Okay? Because it is inspired by God, but it's a human document. And so elsewhere in Scripture we do find things, some details that are not correct. Doesn't bother me, because nothing that concerns salvation is up for grabs, nothing. Okay, that's all sure and certain.
Right.
So I can live with some possible mistakes.
This was recognized by the scribes who copied the text in some manuscripts, and it's fairly evenly divided. They simply move the location and move it so that it's in the right apartment or in the holy place. And this is an indication of the sensitivity on the part of the scribes for the text.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, there is no... So in terms of intentional changes, or unintentional, in terms of intentional changes, nobody would change to the present text. The change would go the other way.
Yeah.
And you have to justify, one, and there would be no reason to change it except for the fact that it is recognized as not being in the right place, and wanting to, save the saints having to worry about this. So the scribe just changed it. But we have ancient manuscripts with both of the readings, and so that's where you look at it in the manner that I have, and it clearly belongs at this place, and I'm with you. It was not a point of concern. He didn't make the mistake and then make the comment to say that we're not going to talk any further about it, but it does indicate that perhaps, and I've had a feeling now for some chapters, that these were the sorts of details that his hearers were concerned about. And he is not wanting to put the emphasis there.
Yeah.
Having gone through chapter 8 and all of that, he has established something, and now we go back to what they instinctively think about. And I was looking for the text, some of you New Testament scholars may be able to take me there, where it was made clear that the earthly was not the point of reference. It was a shadow, a copy, a parable coming up of the heavenly, so that while these analogies are drawn, heaven is not based on earth,
Right.
but the
The other way
tavnit,
around.
the blueprints that were given to Moses by God,
Right.
and said, see that you build it like
In
this.
fact, this very chapter 9 of Hebrews will say what you have just summarized specifically. So clearly, just to make sure we bring our viewers along with us, just to reiterate that, ancient manuscripts differ in wording from place to place as you line them up and compare them with one another. And as there are people who devote their whole lives, textual scholars, to analyzing and sorting out with an idea of trying to reconstruct, to the extent that we're able, and we're humble about this, what might have been the original. But what you are implying, and indeed what you're saying, Bernard, is that the more difficult reading, the more problematic reading, is likely, very likely, to have been the original one.
Yes.
Because that's what accounts for the doubleness of the tradition, that you have two different readings. It's often an attempt to correct a headache or a little slip or a little problem of some kind. And so while we don't decide these things by counting manuscripts,
Right.
We have to value the older and the more conservative tradition and so forth. But that would imply that what looks to us like a curious little oddity here may very well have been the original reading.
Yeah. But John, it's only a problem, really,
Yeah.
if you believe that every text, every word of the
Exactly.
Bible is
Exactly.
inspired directly by God.
Inerrancy has a
Inerrancy.
problem with that.
I don't believe that. And in fact, in my faith tradition, Seventh-day Adventist, we do not believe that.
Yeah.
That every word was dictated by God. Not at all.
So this is just a case in point of a larger principle, and I believe it's helpful to our viewers to have that before us. So Beverly, if you pick up with verse 6 and take us down, maybe, 6 through 9 or 10, something
Sure
like
thing,
that?
yeah.
See how that begins now to work with and to unpack what we have before us.
Sure thing. I'm reading from today's New International Version, just so that we know a little bit of a difference from our Bibles here. Up 6 through 9, right?
Or 10.
Or 10. Okay. When everything had been arranged like this, the priests entered regularly into the outer room to carry on their ministry. But only the high priest entered the inner room, and only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins of people, the sins that people had committed in ignorance. The Holy Spirit was showing by his way that the way into the most holy place had not been disclosed as long as the first tabernacle was still functioning. This is an illustration for the present time, indicating that the gifts and sacrifices being offered were not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. They are only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order.
Ah, yes. Good. Anything jumps out at you there at the moment?
Yeah, I think that kind of, you had brought this up. The priest also brings an offering for himself. So I think that is a really different idea as we see, priests being, the ones that are our access to God, and all of a sudden it's almost the moment where you realize that your parents aren't perfect. And I had this moment, remembering, reading this and thinking, oh, this is that moment where you realize even the priests need to bring their own blood first for their own forgiveness, and only after that then is the process where they are able to offer that to the congregation. So that was something to think quite interestingly about. Yeah.
There, for those of us in pastoral ministry, that's in a way kind of comforting and reassuring.
A little helpful, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Leo.
So he goes into the weeds here with some of this detail. So what I try to do is work back and say, okay, what is the point? I like to get the big picture. And what I've been noticing, as you piece together what he's saying, in chapter 7, he makes clear the Levitical priesthood did not bring about perfection. Right? There is something inadequate about the Levitical priesthood. So as I list the inadequacies of the Levitical priesthood and the sacrifices, what this section makes crystal clear is that the entire sacrificial system could not cleanse the conscience of the worshipers. It could not do that. It only dealt with these external, ceremonial kinds of cleansing. And he sketches that, right? Food, drink, various washings and regulations for the flesh. It dealt with externals. It could not deal with this inward dilemma of a defiled conscience. And he's going to make clear, of course, that the new covenant and the high priest and the once and for all sacrifice will address that profound problem. So he does take to task, the Levitical priesthood and the sacrifices, as we know in chapter 10. He's very clear. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. There's got to be another way, another solution to that problem.
Of course, animal blood, cannot really take care of the sin problem. We need something greater, someone greater.
Right.
And that's what Jesus provides.
Right.
In this this paragraph 6 through 10, the way he sets it up is very interesting in my judgment. It seems to be set up, starting at verse 6, to indicate limited access. See, who got to go even into the holy place? Only the priests. Who got to go into the most holy place? Only the high priest, and only once a year. Okay. So later he's going to talk about Jesus, and he has thrown open, as it were, the gates of the temple to everyone who believes. Okay. Everyone. You don't have to be a priest. You don't have to be a Levite. You don't have to be a high priest.
You can be female.
You can be female.
Be a Gentile. Remember how the court was set up. Gentiles can go this far. Jewish women can go this far. Jewish lay people can go this far. Priests and high priests into a kind of a intensification of the sacredness, right?
Yeah.
But here, so help me.
The door is open.
Bernard.
I find the barrier, as it were, of verse 5 frustrating. Above of these things we cannot speak now in detail, but we go on and we make points, and the question that comes to my mind, is this a failure of God to do the right thing, to set it up properly? Or is it simply a model that was intended to point to God, and forgiveness came from God, and this enabled the sinner to see the need and to be drawn to God? And now, in the person of Jesus as God, all of this takes on a meaning which was there but was rarely explored. Like Psalm 51. You don't desire sacrifice, else would I give it. All of those things in the Old Testament. Make it as late as you like. It's still the Old Testament. And now here, in this imagery, he says, you looked into that instead of looking into the face of God. This was pointing you towards Jesus. And it was not a failure of a system. It was the best that was available that they could relate to. And now we get to look at it in an entirely different way, which is a reason to go forward, not to go back. Going back will not provide anything, any satisfaction. And going forward will do everything that you had hoped for, and it's still there.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Very good. Again, I go back to the illustration of the candle and the sunlight. It was the candle. It was from God. It wasn't bad, but it was a candle. Jesus comes, the sun has risen in its fullness. We don't need the candle anymore. You're crazy to go back to candlelight when you can have the sunlight.
I have a question for you for the sages of the Adventist Church. Earlier you had said what a very Adventist, almost following the Adventist, we're looking forward and we're not looking back. What would you say to, how does this fall in our ears as Adventists, looking forward and not looking back, and just as historically, finding error or finding moments in which you, looking, just as...
Well, I think it builds. Looking forward, I think builds on where we come from. And, we have a great tradition. I use that in a good way. Great heritage is Adventist.
Yeah.
And our sanctuary doctrine, so many wonderful things have come from that. But I believe, our thinking has advanced beyond where our thinkers were early. Not contradicting, but building on it, okay? I think what has happened, especially since 1888, and I don't want to go down that road, but that was an important moment in the life of the Adventist Church when the church began to focus on Jesus and his saving work. And, I think that's the difference, We're sort of post-88, more and more so.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes out of this passage in 9:1 through 10, let's not forget the latter part, the very last clause of 10, where they have the Old Testament sacrificial system imposed until the time, and here this word can either be of reformation or of a new order, right? And so he's juxtaposed here two orders, if you will, two chapters of redemptive history. He's just sketched the first one here in 1 through 10, and he's about to sketch another chapter of salvation history with 11 and following, when Christ now appears as high priest.
Yeah, so there is a horizontal line here. There's a temporal thing from before and after.
Right.
The time being, we read, and then the time to really, really set things right, it seems. So it may be that it's helpful for us to remember that somehow, while we've got the horizontal, we've got the vertical as well.
Right.
The author here is thinking about two levels. And we might want to talk about that a little more next time. Now, you've already hinted at it, Leo, and how those two interact. So we've got some unfinished work to do with these couple of paragraphs, even before we move on, in this rich and interesting chapter on searching for answers.